You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
You're listening to episode 66 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. I'm Mark Mulcaster, one of your co-hosts, and joining me this week, as always, is the only half of this podcast who hasn't tested for COVID-19 this week, Mr. Mark Newbold. How are you doing, Mark?
I feel a bit sad, really, because I fail all my tests.
Nice. Yeah.
But you've passed. You clearly passed.
Yeah, I got a positive test this week, so I am, along with the rest of the family, in isolation, just kind of making our way through it. Luckily, mild symptoms on my count, and very mild to like almost no symptoms for the rest of the family. So yeah, not too bad, but it serves as a good reminder that actually all this talk of vaccines and everything else, for easing of lockdown for the festive period, we're not through the woods yet. So it's quite poignant, I think.
Certainly, yeah. It's that old thing. Anthony Daniels said it the other week, didn't he? Wear a mask. We're all going to wear a mask. It's got to be done. And being Star Wars fans, we're really into masks, aren't we? We're going to talk about somebody who's wearing a mask later on at great length, I think.
Well, more of a helmet, yeah, but absolutely, definitely.
Yeah.
So how are you? How has your week in Star Wars been?
My week in Star Wars, well, as it was last week, dominated by the Ahsoka episode, this week has kind of been dominated by the you-know-who episode that we'll talk about in a bit. And busy, but the site's going really well. Lots of people coming in checking out Fantha Tracks, which is always nice. Yeah, just ticking over. How about you? Apart from the obvious.
Apart from the obvious, yeah, all good. Really enjoyed Mandalorian, which we will talk about in a bit. I'm still kind of like catching up with deliveries and stuff like that. Recently had a fair few number of kind of like deliveries go from pre-orders to actual orders and stuff. So I'm kind of looking at lots of kind of new books and lots of new books that we're going to obviously talk about on Canon Fodder at some point, about vintage collection figures and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, I haven't quite worked out how to really increase the amount of storage I've got in this room. So
you haven't invented a TARDIS yet?
No, unfortunately not. It's the wrong franchise, unfortunately.
I know. It's that old Mary Poppins bag, isn't it? So.
Yeah, that would be better. At least that's kind of like from the same company, I guess, now these days, from Disney. So it's all good. Enough of this chatter. Let's talk some news and stuff. And Uncle George Lucas. We've had the long-awaited release of a second instalment of Paul Duncan's Star Wars Archives this week. And the second book covers the years from 1999 to 2005, which basically is entire prequel trilogy production. But, Paul Duncan luckily had some time actually with the maker himself of George Lucas. And there's a quote on the site that you can find in the book whereby George basically talks about the prospect of starting a new trilogy and weighing up, does he start up and commit to this new trilogy, or does he retire? And then also he kind of goes on to talk about how he knew that if he did sell the company, he would have to take a step back. He's too much of a micromanager to kind of like let people kind of run with it and just get on and do it without meddling. So it's an interesting quote. What did you make of what George said?
Well, I'm looking at the article on the site right now, and I'm noticing, because I couldn't paste it from another location, that somebody wrote, instead of writing micromanager, they've written micro-manger, which feels very festive, like a tiny Jesus is going to live inside something like a micro-manger. So I'm going to correct that typo. I think, yeah, it makes all the sense, because we know George is a micromanager, and he mentions Empire and Jedi, which if you wanted to think of an example of George not being able to step away, not being able to just completely give the reins to somebody else, Empire and Jedi are the best example, especially on the face of it. Jedi, Empire, there was different problems and different issues, mostly financial. And then Jedi, again, he wants the satisfaction and comfort of knowing it's all wrapped up properly. And Marquand did a great job, and Kazanjian was a new producer, and ILM were pushed to the limits, and so it was totally different sort of circumstance on Jedi. But the point being is, whatever the circumstances, George felt like he had to be there. So when he says, I knew being one person removed wouldn't work for me because I'm a micromanager and I can't help myself, it makes sense in the framework of, well, I thought if I do this trilogy, I know it's going to take me 10 years, and I would have been 69 when I started it. I'd have been pushing 80 by the time I finished it, because that's another thing to remember as well. George wouldn't have made a film in 2015, 17, 19. He would have made a film, let's say, it would have been 2015, 2018, 2021. He'd have done it every 3 years like he always did. They'd have probably still come out in May.
Yeah.
If he'd have done it, because it wouldn't have been the same. He wouldn't have had to worry about Marvel releasing their stuff in May and stuff, all that consideration. Everybody would have moved for Star Wars if it had been Lucasfilm doing it, not Disney doing it, because it's just how it's generally been, isn't it? So he's kind of said all of this before. He's summarised it much more succinctly in this, and it's been well worded, so you totally get where he's coming from and what he's getting at. And I do kind of feel a little bit better reading it, because I've always sort of thought he must have. And we know that he had ideas for the sequel trilogy that didn't get picked up on. Well, it wasn't for him to lead the sequel trilogy. He wouldn't have sold the company if it was. So that's fair enough.
Yeah.
But for him, it must be so difficult to just have to sit back and let other people pick up these characters that he came up with 50 years ago and run with it.
Yeah, I mean, he even says actually in one of the last kind of paragraphs in this quote, it says, "I've spent my life creating Star Wars 40 years and giving it up was very, very painful. But it was the right thing to do."
Yeah.
It's really hard for us as fans to kind of be put into that position to kind of imagine what it's going to be like. When you're a creator, when you're a creative, and when you're a director and you're trying to kind of get these films off the ground, and you put your heart and your soul and, you breathe life into these characters. We've heard it before that not just George, but loads of directors kind of say, these characters kind of are my children. J.K. Rowling said something very similar to that about Harry Potter. I'm kind of with you. I think some people kind of really kind of just saw the headline of like, he sold it for $4.7 billion, but don't really kind of take into consideration the personal sacrifice that actually he had to take. We could probably sit here and discuss for the rest of the episode if it was really the best thing for him to have done, to have written, directed and produced the prequels, or really maybe he could have had somebody else handle the writing duties a little bit more, or had a co-writer or something like that, rather than take it all upon himself. Because then if he did that, I mean, it only takes 3 years for him to do it, because he has to do everything himself. When Disney have come in and stepped in, they've been able to churn out a movie virtually kind of like a little bit less time.
But we could talk at length about that, though, couldn't we?
Exactly, and precisely, we can kind of say the flip side is that, well, actually, by creating Star Wars in a committee, is that even the right thing to do, or shouldn't? Should Star Wars, or does Star Wars benefit from a singular vision and a singular voice writing and really kind of driving the whole franchise forward? Or
even unified voices. I mean, it feels like The Mandalorian feels very much like Filoni and Favreau are on the same page.
Yes. Absolutely, I think you're right, but at least with The Mandalorian, it seems like they kind of hit it off, and the art of The Mandalorian really talks about that. We talk about the relationship between Filoni and Favreau and how they kind of just clicked at a very early stage, which I think when you're working on something like this is so important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And Lucas was lucky in the sense when he started off on his own Star Wars journey, which sounds silly because he came up with it all, but when he kicked off, he'd got Kurtz he'd worked with on American Graffiti, and they'd done stuff together on other projects, and they'd both been involved in Apocalypse Now, and there was all the connections between the two of them, and they were a great partnership. And then, of course, Kurtz gets to the point where he sees a sort of parting of the ways creatively, and he kind of took the rap for the financial issues and Empire, so they part ways, and then another guy comes in, and then Rick McCullum comes in, he's another guy, and Lucas is got to make these new relationships to the point where he probably thought, do I need partners, or do I need people just to go, right, here's the tick list of things I want doing, can you please go and make sure they're done? Because that was always the thing that McCullum, for example, got. He was the marshal, wasn't he? He was the guy going out and giving the instructions and keeping the ship tight, which of course you need. But you've always got the sense that Lucas was becoming more and more remote, wasn't he? That was the feel.
From what I understand anyway, Rick McCallum is still very much like a classic Hollywood producer, whereby, his role in all this is to ensure that the vision of the directors is fulfilled. And the thing is also, it's really difficult to argue with George Lucas about Star Wars.
You can't. You literally can't.
And that's got nothing to do with the fact that, he owns a company. It's like he came up with it, and okay, this is George's story, and George is the only person who really knows what he wants to achieve. So you kind of got to just go, okay, George, that's fair enough, and let him crack on with it.
It's just one final thing on this. I think it was a little bit, not regrettable, just almost sad in that his final line in the piece was, I thought I was going to have a little bit more to say about the next 3 because I'd already started them, but they decided they wanted to do something else. So, and things don't always work out the way you want because life's like that. Well, that's fair go, and that's fair enough. And also, I think that's fair enough to Disney and to Iger and to all the others, because if they've bought it off Lucas and slapped down, just over $4 billion for it, they completely have the right to do whatever they want with it. They know they've got a built-in audience. It's one of the mega franchises. Everybody knows Star Wars. Even if they've not seen it, people know what Star Wars is, even if they've never seen it. So it's sad that he didn't have more of a say, but by the same token, completely understandable that they would want to put some distance because the perception would be he's still in charge.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I get that. But I also get his sort of feels for it, because it would be tremendously difficult. He says, I want to step away. I want to take some time for myself and raise my daughter. And you can imagine him getting 5 or 6 years down that line and suddenly going, I've had the most awesome idea.
Exactly.
And knowing that he can't just go up to his room and get his yellow notepad out and write it and task people with drawing sketches and make it happen. He can't do that anymore. He couldn't make a Star Wars film if he wanted to now. He'd have to ask somebody else if he could do it, and that must be really difficult.
Oh, absolutely. Even if he paid for it himself, he would still have to ask permission. And I think that's it. I mean, you've hit a really the nail on the head there. I think with that, to be honest. But even in the Bob Iger book, I'm pretty sure Bob Iger kind of mentions that just as the deal was going through, there was kind of like either some kind of remorse or kind of like a reluctance on Lucas. Like he had kind of approached Disney, he wanted to sell it, but as things got closer to the time, I think it was dawning on him like what this was actually going to mean, and actually what this was potentially going to mean for him and his future. It must be really hard to just kind of go, okay, I'll sign, and off you go.
I have made a career out of wearing a mask. I want you to save your life by wearing a mask, and maybe save the lives of others by wearing a mask.
This week, US talk show host Jimmy Kimmel was busy catching up with a couple of the saga's bigger names. First off, he spoke to Natalie Portman, who is currently out in Australia prepping for her return to the Marvel MCU in Thor: Love and Thunder. And secondly, and more importantly for us, Rogue One's Diego Luna, who let slip that he's in London hanging out with some old friends.
Hi, Diego.
Hey. How are you, Jimmy?
I'm good. I'm sorry it's so late. I heard it's like the middle of the night where you are now, huh?
It's very late. I'm in London. It's late, cold, but I'm happy to be here.
You're shooting right now? What are you shooting right now over there?
A tiny little thing. I mean, a short film with some friends.
Right, for Disney Plus with Lucasfilm involved.
They're my friends, yeah.
So it's great to hear that production is finally starting to get rolling on the Cassian Andor series, which seems like it could be in production at about the same time as the Obi-Wan series.
It seems to be that way. I love how coy he is. He won't reference it by name. I mean, I think there's a title, but I don't think anybody's sort of letting that leak. I like the way he was just as reticent as he possibly could be without saying no. Never deny anything by saying no, because all that does is confirm it. So he just tries to kayfabe it and slide around it, but he doesn't quite make it, and then go into the article. I mean, Kimmel's, like you just mentioned, Natalie Portman, he's had a good little run, and when the films come out, it's generally the Kimmel episodes that are the most fun. When he has people on, he had Harrison Ford shouting at Chewie on the roof and all the other stuff that they did. You slept with my wife and all that stuff that he did was brilliant. Yeah, it's just good to know that the show's underway. I mean, we know they're coming, and we're so wrapped up in Mandalorian at the moment. And I think Kenobi, stepping onto that quickly, people were expecting that to start sort of Easter time. And now it sounds like...
Yeah, March, wasn't it, I think?
Yeah, I think it was. And now it sounds like it's... I think they actually gave a date. I think it was January the 4th, I think. So that's really stepped forward. So like you just said, we've got Cassian filming. We've got Kenobi filming at the same time around the... It's like Indy when young Indy used to travel around the world shooting all over the place. You've got 2 Star Wars productions there. You're going to have Mando as well. Presumably, both of them will be done in stagecraft scenarios, in volumes as well. But as we saw in this week's episode of Mandalorian, they're not averse to going out on location as well. So that's really good news. And I'm so excited about the Cassian show. Weirdly, even though I can't wait to see Ewan back as Obi-Wan, I'm really looking forward to the Cassian. I think that's the one that's got the most potential, I really do.
Yeah, see, it's interesting because at least I think probably for us over this last, year or so, there just seems to be more kind of scuttlebutt and more kind of like talk around the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. It seems like the Cassian Andor series was, everybody knew that it's coming, but it seemed like it was always kind of on the horizon or just over past the horizon. So it was always like, oh, we've got Clone Wars coming back and the second season of Mandalorian, and, you know, Obi-Wan's going to start. Oh yeah, and Cassian Andor's going to film at some point. And the thing is also, I guess, like, if you look back, there was always quite a big PR movement behind the starting of the productions for the saga films. For JJ kind of broke the internet for a couple of days when he could have, you know, took photos on Instagram and Twitter and stuff, and of clapperboards and that. But it seems like with this TV series, they're kind of now just getting on with it. It's going to get into production. There's not like any huge announcements being made, like this is the first day of, you know, production on the Cassian Andor series. Here's a cast. It seems like they're just now kind of cracking on with it, almost like any other kind of TV series that seems to kind of just happen in the background without any massive whoop-de-doo about it.
Well, I think it goes back to our conversation about Lucas earlier in a weird way, in the sense that Lucas owned Lucasfilm, obviously. It was an independent company and pretty small and a tight ship, and he would partner up with distribution companies like 20th Century Fox, which weirdly, going back to that briefly, if he'd have stayed independent as Lucasfilm, Fox is now owned by Disney, so he would have been having his films released by Disney anyway, wouldn't he? I'd never given that a thought, but that would have come to pass. But the point being is that when it was just Lucasfilm as opposed to Lucasfilm as part of Disney, it was a much tighter ship, a much smaller ship, a smaller concern. You wouldn't have multiple shows around at once doing things. So I think for them to try and do it almost under the radar, which even though we knew Mando was coming, kind of when it came and it was to the level that it is, it did feel like it was done under the radar. It wasn't, but it felt like it was, because it was just, we couldn't believe what we were seeing. I think now they've got to be so careful. There's now so many people that, you know, you look at the literature program, there's so many authors now doing Star Wars. There's so many comic writers doing Star Wars. There's so many different people, from general writers, entertainment, actors, everything doing Star Wars. There's never been so many people doing Star Wars as there is now. And they don't want stuff to leak. And things always leak. You know, we were speaking last week on the show about Fennec Shand coming back into the show, and it happened this week. Things leak. So pretty soon we're going to start hearing season 3 stuff. Yeah. Quite apart from what the show lets you know is coming. I think they're trying to do the old Grady Ranch thing that George wanted to do way back when. Let's build a volume and make a TV series and release it. It's like Beyonce dropping an album on a Monday when nobody knew she'd even recorded it, you know. It's that kind of vibe. So what the hell? What the hell's this?
Yeah, where's that come from?
Yeah. That's my gut feeling anyway.
Yeah, I think also then it helps temper expectation, fan expectation.
Yeah.
You do wonder how well the fan reaction would have been, or the reception, I should say, for the news of Baby Yoda before Baby Yoda was actually on the TV.
Good point.
Like, if we saw images leaked of Grogu, I think there would definitely have been a large portion of that audience who would have been like, well, that's just crap. You can't have that. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't have another Yoda. And so actually, you know, the best thing they've done, well, one of the best things they did for that first series was just not tell anybody. And the fact is, those Disney NDAs are pretty watertight, and the fear of God and all that. So therefore, you know, nobody really spoke about it really. And if they mentioned it, I don't think it ever made its way back to the public, because I certainly didn't hear anything about it before it came onto the TV.
But I think that's working now in a weird way. You know, all the things that get mentioned get criticised, because we're in the most critical society ever. People just love to moan and be smart asses and pick things apart before they've even seen it. So I think you're absolutely right in that if we'd have seen a picture of Baby Yoda, people would have gone, what the hell's that? And they'd have run it down before they turned the battery pack on and the little thing started moving, you know. You'd have had no chance at all. I mean, I do think Mando, for example, slightly going off topic, and it'll come to pass, I think, in a way with Cassian, especially Cassian, because of when it's set, and also Kenobi to a degree, but that feels to me like it's more focused on him, whereas I think Cassian will be more focused on the era and what's happening around it. If you were writing fan fiction, I will not name names. I had a conversation with somebody this week, and they said, if you were writing fan fiction and somebody said, right, and this thing happens and that thing happens, and then Ahsoka turns up, and then Grand Admiral Thrawn gets mentioned, and then Boba Fett turns up in Slave One, and then you find out you're going to go to this planet, and then this guy turns up, you'd go, that's really shonky fan fiction. But that's what happened in The Mandalorian. And it's because it's done so well, and because they've got every character, every ship, every planet, you know, that they can pull in if they want to. It's not fan fiction, it's official, it's what happened, you know. But if it was written by a fan, you'd go, well, that's really bad fan fiction, because you're just pulling in all the big hitters. But they're doing it now because we've got the techniques to do it. We can make it look like it would in a film and sound like it would in a film. And so why not? There is an element of they are walking a fine line in Mando, at least, of pulling in too many things, but I think they're the right side of that line to the point where it's like, well, this is all serving the story, but it wouldn't take much for them to go the other side and you just roll your eyes and go, ugh. You know what I mean? So it's quite a balancing act they're playing, and they won't just be doing it with Mando Season 3. They'll also be walking that line. I'm not worried about animation. That feels like a separate thing, but they'll definitely be walking the line in Cassian and also in Kenobi. So they've got to get these things right.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Right, so I think we've danced around the topic long enough, but on Friday, Chapter 14 of The Mandalorian dropped, which made a lot of Star Wars fans very, very happy.
I think it did. I think it was long overdue that an episode was named and based on a song by Steps. Been too long coming. When we saw Fett at the end of the Marshall, and we spoke on the next episode of Making Tracks, and we said, be really surprised if we saw Fett again. It feels like he's back in play was the sort of thing that he said. He's back in play, he's on the table, and now he can go off and do his own thing. And I flat out said, I don't think you'll see Fett again this season. Like, I don't think you'll see Ahsoka again. And then they do this episode, and Slave One comes on the screen, and I'm out of my seat pointing at the television to my poor wife going, it's Slave One, it's Slave One, jumping up and down like a 5-year-old. And she's like, what's Slave One? Just this episode, like I say, there's pluses and minuses, but the pluses definitely outweigh any minuses. Just so much going on in this episode. What did you think of it?
I'm the same as you. I watched it first thing in the morning, and my poor girlfriend was trying to have a phone conference in the kitchen, and she said, I don't know what was going on, but all I could do is hear you whooping and hollering and clapping. I'm like, yeah, sorry about that. You'll watch it later. It was a mixed bag episode, really. I mean, because you've got these big reveal, haven't you, of Boba Fett coming back and the return of Slave One, which is a story in itself, so I reckon. Cool. We talked about it last week, and we spent quite a long time discussing like the location of Typhon and like, could this possibly be a longer story point that it's going to take a few episodes or maybe the next season to get to, but then like that they're there. Yeah. It comes back to that whole thing that you said last week about how the travel times in Star Wars at the moment seem to be being compressed and to the point of convenience, really.
Completely, yeah.
So I was really surprised that they got to Typhon so quickly and they plonked kind of like Grogu on the Seeing Stone. It was so overshadowed by the return of Fett, and also, let's be fair, Fennec Shan, for her to kind of come back and to kind of really kind of double down and help him out, I thought was really cool.
You put something really interesting in your review on the site.
Oh, that's a first.
You said that Fennec and Boba Fett both clearly adhere to a code. What that code is, unclear yet, because different organisations will have different ways of thinking about things. But clearly, they've pretty much made a pledge to Din Djarin to help him, and they're living by some sort of code. It's almost it's like an amnesty. Because when Fett turns up, he's like, I want my armor back. In that fantastic Maori accent, which I'm so glad they've stuck with. The whole little tete-a-tete about, you're not a Mandalorian and blah, blah, blah. And he explains about Django, and that's cleared up. And the Civil War, which kind of places him in prior events. And all of that was great. And the fact that Boba was so calm and measured, which you kind of don't expect from Fett, which to me was interesting because I like my Fett, short, curt Yorkshireman, word economy. Don't say too much, just to the point. Clint Eastwood in Fistful of Dollars, he's not there giving you Shakespeare sonnets. It's to the point. What I say is what I mean. Heed my words. Don't read anything into it. I'm telling you exactly what I mean, and what you need to know is what I'm saying, sort of thing. This Fett has obviously had half a decade of existence that's, one, been without that armour, and two, he's lived a different life. So it's Boba Fett, but it's not the Fett we know. But he's in that ship, which was just like seeing Slave One was phenomenal. Of course, tempered by the loss of the Razor Crest. And he's a great mechanic. He'll probably build it again from the Beskar staff and the knob he's got in his pocket. But, seeing Fett again, like you say, and with Fennec, which was great to see, and obviously her sort of almost like android midriff. That was really cool. Just made me think, is she not Guri from Shadows of the Empire? Is that her inside? And we're just seeing a bit of it, or is that a repair? Who knows? We're going to find out at some point. I don't need to know now. I just want to know eventually. Just so many things it laid out on the table. I thought it was brilliantly done. and brilliantly directed.
Yeah. So episode was directed by Robert Rodriguez. It was 33 minutes, but it was 33 action-packed minutes. So, okay, let's get into it a little bit. I mean, I put this in my review again, and if you want to read the reviews, they are available on the Fantrax website, and the link will be in the show notes. To me, anyway, I've always taken the view that Boba Fett is, whilst he's a bounty hunter and he's kind of, he's unaffiliated with either the Empire or the Rebels, he's always kind of come across as like a bad guy. He's always been the opponent of, Han Solo.
He's the heel.
And he is very much the heel. So this whole episode very much felt like this was them trying to kind of show a different perspective of Boba Fett, kind of like, as they say in wrestling, kind of put him over. So turning him from heel to kind of like, babyface to a good guy. Do you think they did it successfully? Or do you think possibly that they kind of tried to do it too much in such a short period of time? Because really, as you say, we see Fett and he wants his armor back. And as far as we're concerned, that's his only real motivation up to meeting Din, is to actually get his armor back.
I think until him and Din had the conversation about the armor, when it was explained to Din who Fett was, who his father was, why he's got the armor, and the lineage, which is so important to Din more than probably to Fett in that moment, other than I just want my bloody armor back. I think because Jango was a foundling and Grogu is a foundling
and Din is as well.
Din is a foundling, there's this association now. So I think they're kind of on the same page in that sense. Fett, now he's got his armor back, well, what else is he going to do? He's got his ship back, clearly. We don't know when he got his ship back. Did he have it when we saw him at the end of the Marshal? We don't know, because if he did, you think he would have just rocked up to Mos Pelgo and gone up to the Marshal, to Cobb Vanth and gone, give me my armor back. So there's got to be a reason for that, which I'm sure we'll find out in a book or a comic at some point, or the miniseries when it comes. I think Fett needs a cause. He's back in the world, like you said before. He's back in the world. He's got his armor back. Okay, other things will have to change. He needs to get his mojo back in that sense. He can clearly look after himself. That whole sequence with him taking out the stormtroopers was like Chirrut Imwe in Rogue One with the staff. It was that sort of level.
Yeah.
So that was fantastic to see. And Fennec as well, who clearly awesome. We really get to see her at her best. But also, they've seen Din lose the kid and lose his ship. And you can only imagine, to a bounty hunter with any sense of empathy, not that Boba Fett was ever empathetic, but again, it's the same man, it's the same name, but half a decade of life has happened to him. He's not in the same mindset, I don't think. He is a different man now.
No, you make a very valid point, and I saw a few people online in various different places commenting about, well, Boba Fett, he's only meant to be about like 45 or 41 years old, but yeah, he looks so much older. And obviously that's kind of a commentary on the fact that Tamara Morrison is that much older than the character who's playing. But I said, yeah, but come on, you've got to take into consideration the desert, the sarlacc, like I said, half a decade of we don't know what's gone on. And that not only goes to his physical appearance and the fact that he was scarred and battered as hell, and I thought the makeup just looked amazing. I mean, the texture on his face, I just wanted to kind of peel his skin off.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly the effect of like a sarlacc stomach acid has on human skin, or how long he was down there for.
Or on a clone. Don't forget, he's a clone.
And he's a clone, albeit an altered one in terms of like growth acceleration and stuff. He could have been lying up with those twin suns on the edge of the Sarlacc once he's clawed his way out, for instance. And he could have just had one of those epiphanies, one of those...
come to Jesus moment.
Yeah, pretty much. Kind of like, you know what? If I get out of this, I want to get my armor back, just because that's the one thing. And I think what's quite nice about it, and it's a nice touch, because it's that real strong bond and relationship that Jango had with Boba, and I really like that they've really reinforced that. And I like how I think fairly seamlessly, fairly deftly been able to kind of, for lack of a better term, reintroduce Boba Fett into the fold of the Mandalorian culture, because during the Clone Wars, Dave Filoni himself and George Lucas said, well, actually, he's not really a Mandalorian. But you had Governor Ulmac kind of say, Jango Fett just kind of acquired the armor from somebody, he's not a Mandalorian. It's basically, through that kind of bit of dialogue, has almost re-legitimized Boba Fett as a Mandalorian, because he's no different from Din Djarin.
And that really sung to me, that point you've just made. We had years and years, Fett, I flippantly said in the review, finally, the return of a character we first saw in the Star Wars Holiday Special, not Akmina, Boba Fett. We had all that history of Fett, all the supposition as kids, and then what they started to lace into the Marvel comics and all the stuff that you got back in that wonderful run. And then over the years, the Dark Horse stuff and the books and everything else. And then obviously the prequels changed it. And, the Bounty Hunter Wars, which was just a bit before the prequels. But you know what I mean? All the things that we learned. And then it all kind of becomes part of the mythology, even though the facts are blurry. But even that, I mean, like on the review on the site, the guide that we do for every episode, Sander DeLange has worked out all the Aurebesh and sort of worked out what was in the chain code.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Yeah, I was well surprised.
Totally, I never fully appreciated what a chain code was. So even that adds more detail, you know. And again, it's adding in prequel stuff, it's adding in Clone Wars stuff. It's just all slowly food blender mixing it all in. You know what I mean? It's just, I love the way that's all been done. And this particular thing with Fett, I really didn't expect to see Fett again.
No, I mean the thing is, like, the reaction was from seeing Slave 1. So actually when I saw Boba Fett and when, you know, they have a confrontation, it wasn't like a surprise as such. So it was a bit of an odd kind of like thing, because it was like, that's amazing I'm seeing Boba Fett, but then actually when he confronts Din Djarin, obviously...
But didn't it remind you a bit of when Solo gets the Falcon back in Force Awakens? It's like Han Solo's back in the Millennium Falcon, and here's Fett's back in Slave 1. It had that, to me, had that parallel.
Yeah, it did. I mean, it is kind of, it feels like somehow a wrong has been made right in some respects. And I'm guessing this in some respects, the fact that he's not going up against Din Djarin and he's helping Din now, you know, fulfill his quest to rescue Baby Yoda, that's probably going to then, hopefully then, give us like an idea of where the character is going to either end up or start out as in his own series. So again, it's like, it's a jumping off point for the Boba Fett series, isn't it? So it's clear that, you know, they've decided to kind of push him in that direction, which is cool. But also I do wonder if it would have been equally as cool if actually he could have been a bad guy. Like you said, the fighting was quite brutal, was quite intense. And that is down to obviously Robert Rodriguez and how he directs. I mean, it was definitely not, compared to last week's episode, this wasn't really like a masterclass in how you shoot Star Wars as such, but it was like a masterclass in how you shoot a great action film.
100%. Totally agree with that.
And there's some angles, like some camera angles and stuff that like I don't think we've ever seen in, you know, use in Star Wars. Even down to the camera angle of the boulder coming towards the E-Web cannon and stuff. We've never had something like that, I don't think, in a Star Wars film. And you know, so I thought generally it was just like a great episode. Do we think that the Razor Crest and the destruction from that, do we think that necessarily that's it? Or do we think, because of, from what we understand, the Razor Crest is a make and model of a ship rather than the actual name of the ship that Din was flying? Do we think that means that, you know, we could see the return of, like, you know, Razor Quest 2? Or do we think that possibly Din somehow carries on either with Boba Fett or gets a Slave One because of it?
Two things. One, I never really answered your question about do I think Fett's becoming a good guy. I think because we're watching a series about a bounty hunter who just happens to be doing something that fits his moral compass, if you like, his code. I think and bounty hunters in Star Wars are generally not good guys. So I think if we were watching Din and he wasn't on this crusade to return the child to his people and he was being a bounty hunter, over the time the character would soften because you've got to have some sympathy for the protagonist. But essentially, we're rooting for the bad guy sort of thing. In the Star Wars frame, with Fett doing the right thing by Din, especially after the destruction of the Razor Crest and losing the kid, and goodness knows, he flies right up to that Imperial cruiser to try and get him back and can't. So he does his bit, he tries, because for whatever reason Din puts his jetpack down and doesn't pick it up, which seemed a bit plot convenient to me. That was one little moment I thought, that don't really make sense. The Razor Crest, it probably is. I mean, we've not seen another ship like it. He's clearly modded it heavily, and everything he owns is on that ship. All the money is made. Because in Star Wars, they don't seem to walk around with credit cards like we do. They do seem to have physical coin. So all his money, all his ammunitions, probably everything he ever owned was on that ship and has been turned to cinders. So he's lost everything. So the fact that Fennec and Fett will throw him in with you to try and do the right thing, they're on the same page now as fellow Mandalorians, aren't they? Two foundlings. Do we think we'll see another Razor Crest? I think we'll see prequels to this era of Fett leading up to this point. I don't personally think we will have Boba Fett in the story for that long. Two things could happen, I think. One, he could just walk away from it all and go back to the desert. Sure, Fett was the joke, but just happily go back to where he was. He's like, you know, he's got his armor back and he's done his thing and whatever, and he, you know, and that's him done as a bounty hunter. And he just says to Mando, take the damn ship, and he has the ship. Or Fett doesn't make it.
That's exactly what I think.
Yeah, and he inherits the ship.
When they go to break out Baby Yoda, and I've really failed in my attempts to maintain the use of the term Grogu.
We'll get
this
there.
episode is dreadful, yeah. So when we go to rescue Grogu, so it's Din Djarin, it's Boba Fett, it's Fennec Shan. It sounds like it's possibly going to be Cara Dune. And it's Mayfield.
Yeah.
Potentially, I'm not too sure if Grief Karga is going to come, because there's part of me that thinks that maybe the Chapter 12 wrap-up, the summation of the fact that now Navarro is a safe kind of planet, he might not actually come, but then you just say Baby Yoda's captured and he's probably going to come.
He's got a soft spot for the kid, hasn't he?
Yeah. And obviously this is possibly where we tie back in with Bo-Katan, because if you're going to go after Moff Gideon, who do you know who actually is gunning for Moff Gideon? Was Bo-Katan.
Big time. Yeah.
So that's kind of really like, that's your Seven Samurais or your Magnificent Seven.
Yeah. Or your Rogue One.
Or your Rogue One. There's a part of me that thinks, is this one of those things where basically Fett holds them off, holds the Imperials, as they're trying to retreat to like Slave One. And again, it's kind of left ambivalent whether or not actually, he makes it out or not. So maybe they set charges and they blow up like Moff Gideon's ship. Everybody gets onto Slave One and Slave One escapes and the ship blows up, but we don't necessarily know if Fett made it out alive or not. And then, yes, as you say, Din's now got the Slave One, which might make it quite interesting.
Yeah. Just thinking, I had the parallel to Solo getting the Falcon back in Force Awakens.
Yeah.
And we never thought, until the sequel trilogy was announced, which I never thought would ever happen, so thank God it did, to see Harrison Ford back as Han Solo, even though it was only for one film, he was so damn good in that role, in that film. He was just, it was probably my favourite performance of, certainly equal to Empire. I thought he was wonderful as Han Solo in Force Awakens. I just loved him. I thought he was brilliant.
Yeah.
And it was so crushing that he died. But it was a treat that we got it, because we never thought we'd get it. And now for, 37 years, we thought Boba Fett was dead.
Pretty much,
didn't think he survived. And there was hints and stuff in different books and certain elements that made you wonder. But for the most part, you thought he was dead, and now he's back. We now know we saw his face in chapter 5 of season 1. We saw him in chapter 9 of season 2, or chapter 9. You don't need to call it seasons. And now we've seen him again. If he doesn't make it, if he does a sacrifice, if he goes down fighting, whatever, we've had Boba Fett back. Everybody's happy. Boba Fett fan club's happy. The Mandalorian mercs are happy. God knows Hasbro and Sideshow and Funko and all those lot will be happy. Lucasfilm are happy. The Fett fans are happy. Everybody wins, even if he doesn't make it out of season 2 or 3 or whatever it is. And I think now the Razor Crest has gone. He could get another Razor Crest and it would be Razor Crest 2, or give it another name, because why would you give it the same name if you could sell another ship with a different name? It's merchandise and fuel Star Wars.
Absolutely.
We're not stupid. Yeah. But, if he inherits Slave One, it's now Din Djarin's Slave One. Like Anakin's lightsaber became Luke's lightsaber, became Rey's lightsaber. They're three separate things, but they're the same thing. Jango's Slave One, Boba's Slave One, Din's Slave One. I still think at some point, he doesn't even refer to himself as Din Djarin. He's the Mandalorian. And Boba Fett's got this battered armour that's been sarlacc acidified. I still think that the legend of Boba Fett in certain circles would still hold so much power and so much sway. Because Din doesn't go around calling himself Din Djarin, we as the audience know him as that, but I don't think many people in the show do. I still see at some point him ending up essentially inheriting the mantle of Boba Fett. It just seems to have a lot of influence and power in that galaxy. As a character, he's completely earned his own legend. There's just part of me thinks that that's going to happen at some point. I could be completely wrong. God knows I've got plenty of other predictions wrong this season. Happily.
Well, yeah, exactly. We happily got the big one wrong, which is fine by me.
This is Steve Bloom, voice of Zebralios, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks. Caravast. May the force be with you.
Okay, let's turn our attentions to the little fella who was perched on that rock. Do you think he had time? Do you think he reached out and made contact with somebody whilst he sat on that stone? Or?
Yeah, I do. I think that scene, because Star Wars influences other stuff and other stuff influences Star Wars, that to me was E.T. and Elliot going into the forest with the speaking spell, trying to contact his people. That seeing stone was the speaking spell. I think he has made contact. I don't know whether he's made contact with good people or bad people, because we know there's still, all those years, we've talked about this before, all the years that we thought, let's just Ben Yoda, Luke, Vader and the Emperor and that's it. But we actually know that there was dozens more people around the galaxy were Force users, because there's trillions of people in the galaxy, so how could there not be? I just wonder whether or not he has called a good person or a bad person. I don't know, but I'm certain somebody's coming. Who that is, I don't know. I mean, I've seen people saying it could be Yoda's spirit. It could be Anakin's spirit, which I think would be really interesting if it was Anakin's spirit.
Yeah.
That there's potential for those. Ahsoka kind of makes sense because she's back and she, it's a Filoni show. She's always going to be kind of front and center. Whenever she's around, she's prominent. She's clearly not prominent in the galaxy in this era. It feels like she's gone to ground a little bit and kept her head down, which is probably very sensible. Now she's kind of back into because of Bo-Katan and obviously how did Bo know where she was? So there's obviously connections there. There's other stuff that can happen there. It won't be Ahsoka because Ahsoka sent them to Tython, but I think she's going to come back into it somewhere. There's a twist coming with Grogu. That little bit when he wouldn't give the ball back. That teenage thing I keep saying about baby Groot when he becomes a teenager. I just think there's something there. Is when he's throwing those stormtroopers around the cabin at the end.
Well, this is what I was getting to. Yeah, exactly. Because that's the thing. Because in my own head, I've been trying to wrestle with is the understanding of, okay, he's, Ahsoka said that he's been trained by several Jedi Masters, okay, over what period of time, who knows. So there's a part of me that thinks, okay, has he got the knowledge that he's now not using, or was he basically having the knowledge given to him, but wasn't basically old enough to really understand, and therefore the force power that he's tapping into is just latent force power, and he's not necessarily doing stuff for right or wrong. What he's doing is, like with the stormtroopers, he's basically copying what he's seen his dad do as such. He's seen Din Djarin kick ass a number of times. Obviously, he's using it to try and protect himself. Is it that it was a conscious decision, as in like he's, consciously tapping into either like a slightly dark side kind of area of a force as opposed to the light side, or is it just instinct kind of kicking in?
Ahsoka basically said he knows more than he realises he knows. He's shut it all off to protect himself. So I still see, and again, two things that happened in this one: Fett coming back. Well, three things: Fett coming back, Fennec Shan coming back, the destruction of the Razor Crest. This show is basically doing a Game of Thrones when you never knew who was going to make it out the back end of an episode. So don't assume anything. Don't miss anything, because anything could happen. These characters we get, IG-11. I never knew I thought IG-11 was going to be in it going forward. Quill, I thought he'd be around for longer than he was,
Yeah, for a regular, yeah.
Yeah, totally, and they're both brilliant characters, but both fell by the wayside as part of the wider story, That's Star Wars. That's that gritty underworld place they're living in as characters. Tough place to be. I still think Grogu will at some point sort of click, and he'll talk, and I don't expect him to talk like Yoda. I don't talk like you don't talk like me, everybody on Earth doesn't speak the same, so why would all Yodas speak like that? It's just him.
I've always put that down to old age and living on Dagobah, but obviously
wouldn't help.
Yeah, exactly. There's a part of me that thought, or speculated in my own head, that he was going to sit on that Seeing Stone and kind of have like some kind of slight transformation, like he was going to suddenly mature or something. He wouldn't get like necessarily any bigger. He'd still kind of be like a Yoda-sized kind of character, but yeah, he would suddenly mature and change into something else. I thought that was like an evolutionary type thing. Boy, I was wrong. So I'm glad I didn't actually mention it to anybody else. We're kind of stuck in that point whereby, everybody probably wants to keep him cute because that's a selling point really of him. If people are going to die in this series, or buy it, shall we say, I certainly wouldn't be surprised if Cara Dune doesn't make it out of the end of back end of season 2. I think now that she's become a marshal, I think again she's kind of got to a point where her story's almost told, and I don't get the feeling that she would be as content to just let her walk off into a sunset and kind of go out in a blaze of glory.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. I mean, they've made they've made the Alderaan connection with the X-Wing pilot. That moment, I really don't think anyone's safe. I mean, Grogu, for example, you kind of think that at some point he needs to get more sentient, he needs to get more verbalized and vocal and such, because logically, at some point, we know Luke is going to build a Jedi Academy. There's not that many around. He's kind of started from scratch. Grogu feels like he's a prime candidate for that because, clearly he's pretty strong in the Force. He needs more training. He probably had all the training and forgot it. So he needs to sort of be unlocked again. Or to me, that feels like that's where he could go, logically could go, whether or not he makes it. I think from a practical, real world merchandise point of view, I think you probably need another year with Grogu as he is. before you sort of turn him from. I mean, you think about how many baby Groots they sold. They didn't sell that many teenage Groots, did they? It wasn't the same thing. But baby Groot sold. They couldn't make them fast enough. Marvel are very good at that. Disney are very good at that. Star Wars has always been very good at that. You know, you roll off. You think 5 years ago everything was BB-8. For Marvel, everything was Hulkbuster. You know, they're good at finding these characters. So I think you probably need a bit more time with that to build up the relationship with Din if he gets him back. But honestly, if Baby Yoda didn't make it out of season 2, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm saying Baby Yoda. Grogu didn't get out of season. It would not surprise me at all. It really wouldn't. And that's another question for another show. We'll go into it. Could The Mandalorian as a TV show work with just Mando and not Grogu? Are they a partnership now? Are they tied intrinsically together? Would the show work without him? I don't know.
But it's a good question. And I suppose also we've only got 2 more episodes left of a series, so we haven't got a huge amount of time to wait. I think it's too big to answer this episode anyway, at least, because I think it's probably about time that we wrap it all up. So, with that in mind, obviously we haven't got time to answer any of our listeners' questions, and we have several piling up. If you do have a question, or if you do have a comment about this episode, as in the episode of Mandalorian Chapter 14, or anything that we've spoken about, you can get in touch with us. You can do that quite easily, and Mr. Newbold is going to tell you how you can do it.
You're absolutely right. Yes, you can. If you want to be a part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free, F-R-E-E, capital letters, free Fanthatracks app, free, through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. We do still have that one waiting. We've been so busy over the last few episodes we haven't got to it. We will get to it very, very soon. Christmas is coming. But please send them in. We're always ready to answer questions, so please send them in. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fanthatracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review, please. We need some 5-star ones, please, on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks Only music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. And be sure to watch Good Morning Tatooine, our weekly news show, live on Fanthatracks Facebook every Sunday evening at 9 o'clock GMT, that's UK time, and later on Fanthatracks TV on YouTube and on the website.
Cool. There you go.
There you go.
Brilliant. Well, look, Mark, you look after yourself, take care, and everybody else stay safe, and, you know, take it from me, wear those masks, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's The Fantha from Down Under.